And just moments ago, officials in Pittsburgh releasing more information on the 11 people killed in yesterday's shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue. 8 men, 3 women, ranging in age from 54 to 97 years old. Officials say all the families have now been notified, and the mayor of Pittsburgh pledging the support of the entire community.
To the victims' families, to the victims' friends, we are here as a community of one for you. We will be here to help you through this horrific episode. We'll get through this darkest day of Pittsburgh's history by working together.
Mourners gathering at the synagogue last night in honor of those 11 lives that were lost. This attack comes on the heels of another incident that rocked the country, the series of bomb scares targeting top Democrats. The suspect in that case is in custody. He is scheduled to make his first court appearance tomorrow. Joining me right now is Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe. He is a member of the House Homeland Security Committee. He also sits on the Judiciary Committee and serves as chairman of the Cybersecurity Committee. He's a former federal prosecutor. Congressman, always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria. Your
reaction to all of this. Let me start off with those pipe bombs that, of course, we are going to hear from the suspect tomorrow in court, and really this tone that we are seeing and political discourse.
Well, I think the main story shouldn't be the political discourse. It should be appreciation and admiration for our law enforcement community. I mean, think about it.
Yes.
In a matter of days, our law enforcement community, our bomb technicians, our forensic experts were able to find the one person out of a population of 320 million people that was a would-be terrorist. So I think it's pretty extraordinary and remarkable, and they certainly deserve our praise. You know, I understand people want to always make everything political and turn it into political discourse. Look, there's been rhetoric on both sides. I know that obviously Mr. Soyak here was targeting Democrats. But, you know, we've seen it the other way. It was a Bernie Sanders supporter that shot my friend Steve Scalise last year. At the end of the day, I don't think it's political rhetoric. It's mental illness that is causing these tragedies or would-be tragedies. We've got a mental health crisis in this country.
Yes, we do. You're right. Well, we'll watch the developments there. I want to get your take on the caravan. They have taken a break right now, have gotten off of the bus, but are continuing their goal to come to the U.S. southern border in the United States. And the president continues to say, look, now is the time to get back in and turn around because you will not be let into this country. As the congressman from a border state of Texas, your thoughts on how to deal with this caravan and now another caravan?
Well, as a nation of immigrants, we want to be as generous and compassionate as possible, and we are. We let 1 million immigrants into this country legally every year. That's more than any other country in the world. But to ignore a horde of folks that from unknown origins with unknown intentions other than to come into this country illegally is just plain reckless. I mean, the role of the federal government, while we have one, Maria, is in part to provide for the common defense, and that means securing the sovereignty and integrity of our territorial borders. Now, presidents have paid lip service to that in the past. It's nice, and I think you know, President Trump deserves credit for demonstrating that he really intends to enforce our borders and to enforce the rule of law. So I commend him for that, and I support him.
I mean, the issue is that once they do get here, there's catch and release. So they can come in and then get a court date to come back, and oftentimes they don't come back. So then they're just here illegally.
Yeah, you asked about the impact, Maria. I mean, it's profound in any number of ways, particularly to constituents of mine in Texas, where a lot of these folks will come through. You know, there's an economic cost, the burden on our healthcare system, on our hospitals, on our schools. That's profound, but there's often a far more personal impact. You know, I have a family of constituents that lost 3 members to an illegal alien that had previously been deported. Kate Steinley's in San Francisco, Molly Tibbetts in Iowa. Unfortunately, almost every week we see an example that in this population of people that would come here, are folks that have a history of gun, gang, drug, and violent crime histories that sometimes have a profound impact in a personal way on Americans.
Yeah, it's really important for you to assess the impact because, oftentimes people will say, look, America is a country of immigrants, and we are. And as you say, that is why that we let in legally the number of people that we do. But there is an economic cost to this. And when you do have others coming in and taking the jobs and taking the resources of the people that have already been here, our American citizens have, in many cases, gone through the structure to get in legally. You're taking those resources away from them. The president was at a rally last night in Illinois. He discussed border security in the caravan as part of his campaign. Listen to this.
And the military is going to the border. You do know. And I want the people of the caravan to come into our country, but they have to come in legally, like all of the millions of people that are waiting online right now. They can't break into our borders. They're not going to. You're going to see, we called in the military. The military, oh, they're ready. And I wish I could just tell them, and I say it, caravan, turn around. You're not coming in. You're not coming in.
So, Congressman, tell us the role of the military. The president has sent military troops there. What specifically will the military be doing?
Well, they'll support law enforcement. This is not a deal where the troops go there for a military confrontation. They're not authorized to do that. They have to have authorization from Congress before they could engage in that. What the president's talking about is sending troops in support of our law enforcement to support our immigration laws at the border. So it'll be a supporting role. But I think that clip again demonstrates that the president is sending a message, obviously, to the folks in the caravan that would come to this country illegally. But I think maybe just as importantly, sending a message to the Central American governments that in some cases are encouraging this and have been encouraging this. So, very clearly, I think this is one of the reasons that candidate Trump became President Trump, because he promised to secure our borders, and he's making good on that promise.
Yes.
And I support him.
All right, let's take a short break, Congressman, because I've got to ask you about the week that was. You just came off of your interview with George Papadopoulos, and you were supposed to be talking to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. House Republicans postponed that testimony from the Deputy Attorney General. We want to ask you about Rod Rosenstein, if in fact you will plan to speak with him in the future after this short break. So stay with us. Congressman John Ratcliffe joining us this morning. We'll be right back with more. Well, back, and we are back with former federal prosecutor and Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe. And Congressman, this week you interviewed George Papadopoulos. I want to ask you about this and get a status check on where your investigation stands, looking into the FBI and DOJ's handling of this Trump-Russia investigation. We want to know about George Papadopoulos because this is one of the early individuals that the DOJ and the FBI said was the trigger for them to launch an investigation of collusion between Trump and Russia, correct?
Correct. Yeah, and unfortunately we learned, Maria, this week that the Obama FBI and Justice Department opened up this investigation into whether the Russian government was colluding with the Trump campaign centered around George Papadopoulos, a 28-year-old policy advisor who to this day has never been to Russia and to this day has never knowingly had a conversation with anyone in the Russian government. Maria, the person that bags your groceries at the supermarket has the same number of contacts with Russia and the Russian government as Mr. Papadopoulos, which is 0. One of the troubling things that came out of my questioning is why, if I have seen classified documents that lend support to Mr. Papadopoulos' contention that he had no knowledge or intent to collude with the Russians or anyone on the Trump campaign having that, why he hasn't seen those documents, or why his lawyers haven't seen those documents, or why the judges at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court haven't seen those documents. So the more people we talk to, the more troubling it is, but it's really the same old story. There's no collusion. There never was collusion. And so that's why we need to talk to folks like Rod Rosenstein to get better answers to what he knows about what the FBI and the Department of Justice were doing back then.
So just to close the loop on Papadopoulos, in other words, there was information, there was certain evidence that would refute claims that there was any interaction between the Trump campaign and Russia, but that information was not given to the FISA court when they went to get the warrant to wiretap American citizens.
So that's my opinion of the classified documents that I have seen. Is evidence that would be favorable to Mr. Papadopoulos's claim and assertion with regard to that. And the government would have an obligation to turn that over to Mr. Papadopoulos and his lawyers under what's called the Brady Rule. It appears that did not take place, and I think that's one of the reasons that Mr. Papadopoulos has been public in the recent days talking about moving to withdraw his guilty plea.
Right. He said he may withdraw a guilty plea from the Mueller agreement over misconduct at the DOJ.
Yeah, so he'd have to move to withdraw and convince the court that there is a basis to throw out his plea agreement, which is, again, based on lying to the FBI. But if the government didn't meet its obligations in turning over all evidence that it had that was favorable to his case, then he certainly can make that argument. But setting that issue aside, right, really what's more troubling is how all of this started and why it continued for such a long period of time and why it has consumed the public debate, when very clearly folks like George Papadopoulos and Carter Page have little or no connections with anything Russian. But this has been allowed again to go on for such a for a 2-year period of time.
Well, we thought you would have an opportunity to talk to Rod Rosenstein about all of this, but the meeting was postponed. Paul Ryan didn't want it to move forward. What can you tell us about why that meeting was postponed?
Well, I wasn't in the conversation directly as to why it was postponed. I can tell you one of the reasons was that the Deputy Attorney General was under the impression that it was going to be about a 30-minute interview of his knowledge of this alleged conversation about wearing a wire to record the president pursuant to the 25th Amendment. When he found out that our intention was to ask him details about the Comey firing, his role in that, the aftermath of that, the appointment of special counsel, the scope of special counsel, his role in the FISA process and potential abuses of the FISA process, he wanted a little bit more time. And, hopefully justice delayed is not justice denied. He has agreed to come back. I think he'll spend a full day with hopefully the Judiciary Committee. That's certainly my hope and intention.
So when would you expect him to come back? And is that a public hearing when he'll come back?
Again, it'll be up to the chairman to make those decisions in terms of the format. But I think a lot of folks were unhappy that it was going to be so limited in terms of who was going to get access to asking questions. Right. That I think that this is more likely going to be a public hearing where more members of Congress will be able to ask some of the questions that I just raised directly to the Deputy Attorney General.
And we should expect that after the midterm, sometime in November, you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's likely to happen in the next week before the midterms, right, but I know that, hopefully the sooner the better.
So we had Lindsey Graham on the program last weekend, and basically I asked him what I would like to ask you, and that is what happens to this investigation should the House flip and go to Democrat control. Here's what Lindsey Graham said to me last week in terms of the Senate. Watch this, Congressman.
Well, the House promises to impeach the president and Kavanaugh. I think Republicans continue to try to hold the FBI and Department of Justice accountable for abuse of power. If I'm the chairman of the Judiciary Committee next year, we hold the Senate, I promise you we're going to find out about the Simpson Fusion GPS problem. I promise you we're going to get to the bottom of how they used a dossier prepared by a foreign agent paid for by the Democratic Party to get a warrant against an American citizen. We're not going to turn our back on this. If I'm chairman, we're going to get to the bottom of this. And the only way for me to be chairman is for us to hold the Senate.
So, Congressman, I mean, this feels like the biggest scandal of our time. Are the American people going to understand what took place here, and what are the prospects for the midterm elections? Do you have a plan B in terms of keeping this investigation going?
Well, I will tell you, Maria, I feel really good a week out from the midterms. I think a lot of what Senator Graham was just saying will come to fruition. There is no blue wave in the Senate. We're going to keep the Senate, and in fact, we're going to pick up seats in the Senate, at least one, hopefully two or three. And the bigger the margin, the better it will be for not just investigations, but confirmation hearings, being able to avoid spectacles like we had with Justice Kavanaugh. So I fully anticipate that it will be Chairman. He will be the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and will be able to continue this investigation. The House is going to be tight. History is against us, Maria, but there are things that are working for us. One of those is a president who is out on a daily basis, working his tail off to help Republicans in tough races. The other thing that's working for us, Maria, is I think it's being crystallized in these last few weeks, the choice that Americans have between Republicans and Democrats. I mean, the Kavanaugh hearing demonstrated that Democrats believe in a standard of guilty until proven innocent. And, you know, with respect to this caravan, you still have Democrats out there saying that we should abolish Immigration Customs Enforcement, the agency that supports and enforces our immigration laws. I mean,
Right.
I hate to use the word stupid, Maria, but I can't think of a better word. And you know, sometimes you can't fix stupid, but you can vote it out of office.
There you go. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks,
Congressman
Maria.
John Ratcliffe joining us there. We are learning more about the lives lost in yesterday's horror at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Officials giving more details about the man charged with carrying out that rampage. New reaction in my exclusive interview with the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Ron Johnson, next.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Now for my latest hit.
Welcome back. We are learning more this morning about the victims of yesterday's horrific shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue that left 11 people dead, their ages ranging from 54 years old to 97. Among the lost, a pair of brothers, a husband and wife. This as the FBI releases new details of the suspected shooter, whose social media postings were reportedly full of anti-Semitic rants. He's facing 29 federal counts, 22 of which carry the potential of the death penalty. He's expected to make his court appearance before a judge tomorrow. The horror in Pittsburgh coming on the heels of Friday's arrest of a Florida man in connection to a string of mail bombs sent to prominent Democrats, including the Obamas and the Clintons. My next guest joins me in an exclusive interview right now. He is Senator Ron Johnson, the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. He also sits on the Foreign Relations, Budget, and Commerce Committees. Sir, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for weighing in for us.
Good morning, Maria.
From a Homeland Security standpoint, what are your takeaways from what took place in Pittsburgh yesterday?
Well, you know, Department of Homeland Security had apparently already consulted with the synagogue, and they actually had plans in place for exit in case a tragedy like this were to occur. It's sick that people have to plan for these things, but there is a fair amount of consulting that occurs there. But like Congressman Radcliffe mentioned earlier, this really does point out how effective and how brave our law enforcement is in terms of the bomb suspect, how quickly that person was apprehended. And in this case, again, law enforcement rushing into a synagogue, putting themselves in danger. I think 4 law enforcement officers were injured in that. We need to celebrate these individuals. We need to certainly thank them for their service and sacrifice, not denigrate them.
Yeah, very, very important. I want to ask you about the caravan. The president is asking the Congress to close the loopholes that caused these people to come into the country illegally. Once they get in and claim credible fear, 80% of them, that's 8 out of 10, will lose their case because they are presenting fraudulent claims, according to Tom Homan from formerly of ICE. Your take on what the U.S. should do with these caravans headed to the border?
I completely agree with the president. We need to change the laws. We have to close these loopholes. We need better barriers. There's no doubt about it. But the fact of the matter is we reward people for coming to this country illegally, because if they get in here, they're able to stay. And listen, as troublesome as these caravans are, the fact of the matter is, Maria, on an average day last year, 1,400 individuals came to this country illegally between the borders. Another 500 presented themselves at the port of entries. And again, we're having to deal with these folks. And the broken legal immigration system we have right now is prompting this. So we have lengthened adjudication process. We have an almost unending appeals process. And of course, one of the ways we're handling this backlog of cases is we just simply grant administrative closures to the tune of close to 900 per day last year, although Attorney General Sessions stopped that administrative closures. But no, this is a terrible situation. The main problem is literally our laws, bad court decisions, bad court precedents that incentivize people to come to this country illegally. We need to end that. I'm working on a bill called the Families Act through my committee that would hopefully address the inability to enforce our laws without separating families. Hopefully we can get agreement from Democrats. Nobody wants to separate families. Hopefully Democrats want to secure the borders, but I have my doubts because their solution literally is sanctuary cities, open borders, catch and release, and abolishing ICE.
But I understand that, but why haven't these laws been changed? I mean, the Republicans have been in the majority for the last 2 years. Why haven't we seen any movement on our immigration laws?
Because Democrats want comprehensive reform that literally creates more of these incentives. They're really not interested in closing these incentives. They just want to take a look and listen. I would love to solve the problem of the dreamers, but they won't work with us to actually enforce the laws and these incentives, stop the endless appeals. So again, we have not been able to come together. My own personal preference was let's just take a look at one of these problems, the family separation issue, and let's fix that one. I'm trying to do that with my committee rather than comprehensive immigration reform, which quite honestly, the last time the Senate passed that, it included $260 billion of welfare benefits for non-U.S. citizens. I call that an enormous incentive for further illegal immigration, which is why I voted against it. So let's start this process step by step, try and find the areas of agreement. It's one thing that as a business person I'm always trying to do. Try and find the areas of agreement. Don't worry about the areas of disagreement. Find the areas of agreement, and then try and fix these problems step by step. One word I'd like to, quite honestly, outlaw in Washington, D.C. is comprehensive. We do a terrible job of it.
Yeah.
Maria, one of the things I've done, we've held almost 30 hearings on some aspect of border security.
Okay.
Frequently, when I start out those hearings, I list the laws that we passed to fix this problem. And then as I list the law dating back to the mid-'80s, I talk about the number of people in this country illegally, and it goes from 3.5 million to 6 to 9 to 10 to 11 to 12. We pass all these laws. It says we're going to fix them, but we never do because there's not a very good problem-solving process inside Congress. We need to start solving these problems. But you have to look at the reality situation. We just ignore the reality.
What's the answer to the families separating in terms of changing that law? And which law do you think is the most onerous that needs to go? What's the worst one that you can just communicate to viewers?
Well, right now it is the reinterpretation of the Flores settlement that forces ICE to no longer detain children past 20 days, even if they're in a family unit. And so that is why when we tried to enforce the laws and we separated the children, obviously that was a huge outcry. But that's the first thing. We need to come to agreement on how to actually fix the Flores settlement so that we can detain families and their children together and then adjudicate their claim rapidly so that we can send them home. Michael Chertoff faced a surge of illegal immigrants from Brazil. He established a rapid removal process,
right.
Sent them back to Brazil. The next year, we went from 33,000 people coming in from Brazil to the following year, 1,700. We need consequences. We can't reward people for coming in this country illegally. And right now, because of it, we incentivize families to come in, we incentivize unaccompanied children, and so we've had a huge surge of both those types of illegal immigrants.
Right, because people do what you inspect, not what you expect. Let's take a short break. I've got more to ask you about. Senator, continue with my exclusive interview with Ron Johnson after this, including the U.S. responses to the theft of U.S. technology by China, the latest economic numbers as well. Stay with us. Senator Ron Johnson continues. Welcome back. We are back now in my exclusive interview with Senate Homeland Security Committee Chairman Ron Johnson. And Mr. Chairman, I want to get your take on some of the other big important issues going on, like this fight we are having with China and the vulnerability of our data, our cyber positioning right now. I had the opportunity to catch up with Larry Ellison this week on Fox Business, the chairman of Oracle. And of course, Oracle is home to most, 90% of the world's large companies' data. So he is incredibly informed in terms of our positioning in cyber as a country. Here's what he said about the vulnerability of the U.S.'s cyber material.
This modern cloud is constantly under attack by what are called botnets. Some are state actors, some are just cyber criminals, and we're building modern robotic defenses to protect our customers' data.
What do they want? And who are the bad actors?
There are two classes. There are people who want to steal a lot of credit cards and just make money, and then there are state actors who want to gain intelligence. A government agency that basically the Ministry for Personnel in the United States was hacked by a government actor who was able to get all of the resumes for everyone in the White House, all of the Office of Personnel Management is called. The state actor took all of that information, and they were able to analyze it. And they, for example, they did something very clever. They said, oh, these are all the people that work for the government. These are all the people that work at this embassy in our capital city. How come there are some people that work in the embassy in the capital city that aren't in the list of government employees? Maybe they all work for CIA. I think we live in a democracy. If I don't like our government, I can vote for somebody else. We have a choice.
That's the way it works.
We can pick a very progressive government. We had a very progressive government under Barack Obama. And Barack Obama is president of the United States. I'm still on Team USA. That's my team. I think it's wonderful to see the U.S. economy growing again over 4%. I think our big competitor is China, and that if we let China's economy pass us up, if we let China produce more engineers than we do, if we let China's technology companies beat our technology companies, it won't be long that our military is behind technologically also.
A lot to go through there, Senator. Your thoughts first on the vulnerability of our cyber. I thought Larry Ellison did a good job of connecting the dots of that breach of the Office of Personnel.
Well, you've hit on just another enormously complex problem here. We had our annual threat hearing 2 weeks ago with the head of DHS and Director Wray and the head of the National Counterterrorism Center. And the two big threats they're talking about is homegrown violent extremists. We just witnessed that. And then cyber. And there's no doubt about it that we are incredibly vulnerable. And the federal government, I think a recent GAO report said that the federal government, through its own internal cyber defenses, only detects about 2.5% of incidents. So we're woefully unprepared, and we're not very effective at this. We just saw healthcare.gov got hacked, and I think about 87,000 individuals' personal information was obtained again. So, no, this is a huge problem. My own thoughts is that public exposure and disclosure is probably the best line of defense. People need to be aware of the fact that we've had so many high-profile cyber attacks certainly has energized the private sectors to begin to really start ramping up their cyber defenses. And we have these information sharing groups, I think within the financial services, probably one of the better ones. I really do think we need a private sector model because they're going to be far more nimble than anything the federal government can do. But we need the federal government involved in terms of information sharing as well.
Yeah.
But for example, Kaspersky's Labs, our intelligence community knew about this for years, didn't tell anybody. And so we allowed Kaspersky Labs to become this enormous company, have their software in most personal computers on security. It's an absurd situation. We've seen this report from Bloomberg. I don't know if it's true or not. Director Wray said be careful with it, but potentially some chips being installed in some of these computer boards. Again, the awareness at least makes companies do their own certification process and better testing to make sure they're not vulnerable. But we need better supply chain management. But public awareness, I think, is probably the most important thing. Mandiant issued a report about the PLA they have their own little cyber group out of China there in 2014, and that led to, at least, I think, a lessening of China's bad acting in here. But let's face it, China has been stealing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of our industrial secrets as well as our military secrets. And that is really, I think, one of the biggest threat we face in terms of our relationship with China.
So how long will this fight go on? And what are the implications if we continue pushing back on China? What are the implications for the economy, for people? Because we know that they've been stealing for all of these years, but they won't admit it. Are tariffs the answer here to get them to behave differently?
Well, our vulnerability to cyber attacks is going to go on as long as people use computers. I tell young people, if you want job security, get a degree in cybersecurity. So again, I think the good news is because of public awareness, the gap between those on offense and those of us on defense is quite honestly narrowing. And I think this administration, I think appropriately, is studying the fact of potentially going on offense ourselves as part of the deterrence. But again, it's the public exposure that hopefully, if we have a unified rest of the world when it comes to trade and our dealings with China, will discipline them to begin really adhering to the norms of the rest of the world trading system.
Well, I also think it's interesting to note that, Ellison also commented on the Department of Defense contract that Oracle's trying to get. Amazon wants to get the business with the Pentagon as well. I mean, well, Google walked away, but they're fine going into China and having their search engine censored. Real quick.
Well, again, that's a decision I guess Google's going to make. The Chinese market, 1.4 billion person market, is very attractive, which is why a lot of U.S. businesses go over there and willingly give up their IP as well.
Right.
So this is an incredibly complex situation here. We do need to be aware of the vulnerabilities that we have, whether it's cyber crime or whether it's cyber theft, industrial espionage, possibly going up to cyber warfare, which is the highest threat level.
Congressman, Senator, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much. We will see you soon. Senator Ron Johnson joining us. And we just heard from the co-founder of Oracle, Larry Ellison, about the impact of the Trump economic policy, the growth our country has seen. Up next, we talk with one of the architects behind that policy, whether we will ever see tax cuts 2.0. House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady on deck next as we look ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. Stay with us. Promising an additional 2% cut for the middle class. Can Republicans deliver? Joining me right now is Texas Congressman Kevin Brady. He's chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning.
So, Mr. Chairman, let me ask you, I know that you have wanted to make the individual cuts permanent from the beginning. Is that what this is, or is this an additional tax cut?
Yeah, it's even more. So it's really about keeping the momentum going. Obviously, the economy is booming. We're on track for the first total year over year, plus 3% economic growth in more than a decade. We're seeing jobs coming back, paychecks going up. Main Street is hiring again. So the president's really about focused on more of that economic growth. The House has passed 2.0 before we left for October with 44 Democrat votes for this 3-bill package. It's now over in the Senate, and I think permanence really depends on this election. If Republicans retain control of the House and the Senate, next year we will do reconciliation and make these tax cuts permanent. The president wants to go even farther. He's really focused on the middle class. He just believes they're the ones who get squeezed the most. He's asked us, and we've worked with him on developing another 10% middle class tax cuts for workers and families. And so we'll be ready to move with that as well.
So what you're saying, I mean, the president sort of suggested that we were going to hear about this before the midterm elections. Obviously, there's 9 days left and you're out of session. You're not going to be voting on this in the next 9 days. But are you saying that you're working on an additional 10% tax cut, perhaps to be announced and to bring to a vote after the midterm election, sometime in the fourth quarter?
Perhaps, but really what the president was referring to, and I wish some of his critics would have just simply asked, what he was talking about was when best do we introduce either the bill or a non-binding resolution laying out our commitment as Republicans to doing that, which we talked about doing sometime in the next month or so. But in truth, the lame duck is so unpredictable, that period between the election and the end of the Congress. It really, common sense tells you this is something that, as Republicans retain the House and Senate, that will advance in the new Congress.
I see. Okay, so let me ask you about your assessment of growth right now. We did get a GDP number out on Friday, and it was growth of 3.5%. We know that your economic policies have triggered real growth and animal spirits. We saw a 4.2% economic growth number in the second quarter. So if we had 4.2% in the second quarter and 3.5% in the third quarter, should I surmise that things are slowing down? There is a narrative out there that growth is going to slow down. That's why we're seeing the market so volatile. How do you assess growth right now?
You know, I think, look, when we're retaining above that 3% growth, you know, that's just good news. President Obama never had a 3% growth year in both of his terms. So this is a welcome return to more of what America is capable of. We may not always maintain a 4% growth, as you know, depending on the conditions. But what I am pleased with, look, some of the headwinds we're seeing is because of growth. Interest rates are going up as the Fed normalizes, hopefully not too quickly.
Right.
Do they put a brake on this economy? We're also seeing a challenge hiring workers. So we've gone in a year from a country asking where are the jobs, now it's where are the workers, and literally every business I'm talking to is holding projects back because they don't have the labor force we need. Well, as Republicans, we're going to elevate that workforce issue to perhaps our top economic issue going forward.
Right.
And so, look, some of these challenges we have as an economy is because our economy is now returning to a pro-growth mode.
Do you worry about $1 trillion deficit? The pushback on more tax cuts, obviously, is the debt. Very quickly, sir.
Yeah, I do, but we're not seeing tax deficits over the long haul because of the tax code. It's because of spending. And in fact, Maria, the difference between the Obama less than 2% growth and the Trump greater than 3% growth, that's an additional $44 trillion for the federal revenue. What spending is the problem? Yeah,
there you go. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. We'll be right back. An additional 2% cut for the middle class. Can Republicans deliver? Joining me right now is Texas Congressman Kevin Brady. He's chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning.
So, Mr. Chairman,
let
me ask you, I know that you have wanted to make the individual cuts permanent from the beginning. Is that what this is, or is this an additional tax cut?
Yeah, it's even more. So it's really about keeping the momentum going. Obviously, the economy is booming. We're on track for the first total year over year, plus 3% economic growth in more than a decade. We're seeing jobs coming back, paychecks going up. Main Street is hiring again. So the president's really about focused on more of that economic growth. The House has passed 2.0 before we left for October with 44 Democrat votes for this 3-bill package. It's now over in the Senate, and I think permanence really depends on this election. If Republicans retain control of the House and the Senate, next year we will do reconciliation and make these tax cuts permanent. The president wants to go even farther. He's really focused on the middle class. He just believes they're the ones who get squeezed the most. He's asked us, and we've worked with him on developing another 10% middle class tax cuts for workers and families. And so we'll be ready to move with that as well.
So what you're saying, I mean, the president sort of suggested that we were going to hear about this before the midterm elections. Obviously, there's 9 days left and you're out of session. You're not going to be voting on this in the next 9 days. But are you saying that you're working on an additional 10% tax cut perhaps should be announced and to bring to a vote after the midterm election, sometime in the fourth quarter?
Perhaps, but really what the president was referring to, and I wish some of his critics would have just simply asked, what he was talking about was when best do we introduce either the bill or a non-binding resolution laying out our commitment as Republicans to doing that, which we talked about doing sometime in the next month or so. But in truth, the lame duck is so unpredictable, that period between the election and the end of the Congress. It really, common sense tells you this is something that, as Republicans retain the House and Senate, that will advance in the new Congress.